Welcome to the Marketing Millennials, the No BS Marketing Podcast. I'm Daniel Murray, and join me for unfiltered conversations with the brains behind marketing's coolest companies. The one request I tell our guests, stories or it didn't happen. Get ready to turn the up. Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Millennials podcast. Today's episode is all about category creation, how to not just compete in a market, but define it. I'm joined by Kari Hanson, the Chief Marketing Officer at Robin, a company that's rethinking how flexible work actually works. Robin isn't just another workplace tool. They've carved out a category of their own by helping companies make their office space worth the commute. In this episode, Kari breaks down what it really takes to create and lead a category, how to shape the narrative when the market doesn't even know what to search for, and the power of positioning, storytelling, and internal alignment when you're building something new. If you ever thought about creating your own lane instead of fighting for space with someone else's, this one's for you. Let's dive in right now. What's up, Kari? Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm excited to be here.
I know a lot of people ask you these questions about creating a market category, but I'm going to start asking you questions about creating a market category because I know you talk about it all the time, but I think everybody needs to know why it's important. So the first big question I have for you is why create a new category instead of competing in an existing one?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And it's one that there's two really good reasons to push for creating a category. And they have two very different strategies behind them. And so a lot of times in B2B technology, especially in SaaS, you'll have an up-and-comer innovator trying to take on a really large established company. And so in that instance, it's very advantageous to create a new market category or frankly, a market definition so that you can reframe the competitive landscape in a way that suits you and really sort of question the status quo. And I think that's what, HubSpot, they did it really well with inbound. They created this whole category term, but they didn't actually create a category. They were still very much email marketing and now CRM. I think the other side is if you're a little bit more in the enterprise space, and this is what at SailPoint, a company that I was at when we created a category, there are a lot of reasons to create a new category in that you're also driving analysts to acknowledge this category, the Magic Quadrant from Gartner, the Forrester Wave. There's a lot of value in having that because procurement at the Global 2000, they tend to look at industry analysts and what they're covering from a space before they'll even consider you. It's where you can actually take the value of what you're selling and those contract values go up significantly. And so at the time, we were well into the mid six figures because you're buying something entirely new versus what existed. And so that's why at SailPoint, we created what was called the identity governance category because we wanted to take existing budget from compliance folks and security folks and really create an entire new focus for the CIO to purchase a new product.
What are some signs or early markers that, hey, we should probably start thinking about creating a category? We're competing in too of a competitive market right now. We're not winning contracts. We're not, quote unquote, the best in the market. What are those signs that people should look out for?
Yeah, I think, as marketers, I think we should recognize that if you're not winning contracts because you don't have a good product, this isn't going to solve that. But if you're competing against those big companies, if you hear yourself say, we approach this a different way, or there's a different way to solve the same problem. If you hear yourself saying that over and over again, that's probably when you really need to create a new category and reframe it because you can get in front of it. A lot of times it's when you're losing the contract, you might hear, we're going with, the 500-pound gorilla. And your response might say, well, but we're thinking about this differently. You're looking at the problem differently. You're going to miss this. but it's too late to change the conversation. And so in that point, that's when there's a lot of value to creating a category and doing it sooner. So when you're having those first conversations, you can say, we understand your problem. We're coming at it from a very different perspective, and here's how we think you should solve it. And then the whole mid-funnel conversation is focused on it from that vantage point.
So I know you've created one category, you're on your way creating another category, but could you walk me through the 1, 2, 3 first steps that you think are needed to start this process internally?
Yeah. So step one is really answering, do you need to create a category so that you can own the competitive discussion? Or do you need to create a category because there is value to having a Forrester Wave or a Magic Quadrant? Because that involves a lot of analyst work. It's typically an enterprise. Once you know which path that you need, frankly, in the SaaS world, a lot of times it's really coining a term, getting sort of this following like HubSpot did. Then the next step is really understanding, what is it that you're trying to solve? What's the problem? What is the market? What was the old way of doing it? And what's this new way? And in that frame, you should be able to answer that question without talking about your product. Because this is where, if you're talking about a category, really understanding what are the definitions of this new category? What are the requirements? What does that product look like? And once you agree on, at least internally at a high level, over the next 2 years, here's what this definition should look like, then you follow it very quickly within, here's how our product solves it or is on its way to solving it. Maybe you're only 80% there. And then you can start talking about it at a high level. And if you've really done it at a place where you could define this category without talking about your product, then if there's something going on in the news, if there's something that a competitor does, you can point to that and say, look, this is exactly why we're pushing for this new category definition, because, this company is coming at it from a different point, or, this isn't working, or, here's a security breach and it's clearly not working. And everything that's going on in the industry that you're in will validate why you need a new approach to an old problem, because obviously the legacy tools aren't working.
One thing I want to go into as well is when you start creating a new category, there's kind of a 2-pronged marketing approach. You have to market the category as well as your company. And marketing a category could also cause new competitors to enter that category. So you're also marketing it for this new wave of people, but you also seen as the market leader. So how do you approach that of balancing, hey, we have to talk about, let's say, HubSpot inbound marketing, as well as, hey, we're also marketing our also company and what we do?
Yeah, it's true thought leadership. So if you're talking from a marketing perspective about thought leadership, you're not talking about your product anyway. And so your thought leadership might be talking about this new category, or your thought leadership might be talking about how, company is doing really well. But so this is really from a category perspective, category creation perspective, your thought leadership efforts are really about sort of showing, like, you're the visionary of the market. This is why you need something new. And so you are, by extension, promoting your own company, but it's very much visionary commentary, thought leadership, being that expert. And companies that are really comfortable, they already do this because that expert is not talking about the product until maybe the last 5% of the conversation. And so, I don't want anyone to think that, this is going to be a distraction from what you're doing. If there's truly a need for it, it's just you're focusing. I think the bigger challenge is what tends to happen. Competitors will start using the term, and that can get really frustrating. But if you want to create a category, you need more competitors in the category. So it's actually a positive thing. And this is where, you might want to start pushing panels where maybe there are other companies that are coming at it from a slightly different perspective. Maybe they don't quite compete. So you can do that co-opetition type of discussion and really sort of build it up because when you start talking to analysts, industry followers, if there are multiple companies who all agree that there needs to be this new approach, it accelerates things in a really nice way. And if you can sort of see that as a positive versus being annoyed that, they're trying to steal our thunder, you can really embrace it, and you can get some really good thought leadership out of it with them. And then along the way, the goal would be you also talk about why your solution is better. And so you own the category. You're not going to give it to them.
What is thought leadership look like tactically?
To me, thought leadership, if you look at it from a tactical PR perspective, top of the funnel perspective, it would be maybe putting out a byline to say, here's where I think the market's going, maybe putting out an industry report where you've done some customer research, some industry research, and you add the commentary and putting it out there, then doing a webinar, talking about what's going on in the market, talking about why people care about it, talking about why your future customers should pay attention to this as well as your existing customers, but not talking about how you solve the problem. And so, from a tactical perspective, I love to do bylines in publications, depending on your industry. LinkedIn posts are the easy ones, videos, et cetera. Just that commentary, having sometimes it's the CTO, sometimes it's the head of product, sometimes it's the CEO, sort of saying, here's where the market's going, here's where I think things are going. And then, the webinars are starting to come back. For a while, nobody wanted to do them. Now everybody wants to sit in on them. You can do industry panels at trade shows. Dinners are a great place to do thought leadership, where you might be at a big trade show. You can have a couple customers, a couple prospects talking about, this is why we need to rethink this product, this problem. This is why, you can have a new approach and, solve something thinking outside of the box, and the customers can talk about what they've been doing while you frame it all along of, you guys are the early adopters. Like, let's share what's working for you while you guys are really sort of reshaping what's going on. I think there's a lot of thought leadership that you can do with your existing customers to position them as also thought leaders, because let's be honest, everybody has an ego. And if they can, talk about they were an early adopter, pushing it, share their best practices of what works, it helps you because they're talking about how they're using your product, but they're also out there as a customer validating why you need this new category.
I want to also take one step back too, because this is a big product marketing exercise and positioning exercise. So what does that look like coming up with positioning for this new category? Because you said it's going against the old way. So you're basically anti the old way. So how does that look like in a positioning statement? How does that look like? How do you even start coming up with that positioning statement to make it clear and concise that people understand what you're talking about?
There's a couple ways that you can do it. And I think, first and foremost, it's really about listening to the calls with both prospects and with customers and see what's working and what's not working. Why did you lose some deals? What was it that wasn't there? And really figuring out the crux of the challenge of, this is the problem. Everyone usually agrees on that. That's the easy thing. But here's why the status quo isn't working. So this is, in a lot of marketing teams, you'll talk about the cost of doing nothing. Well, this is really the cost of, solving it the same way everybody else has solved it, even though it's frustrating. And really figuring out, what are the top 2 or 3 ways that you're approaching something different. And then you can really start figuring out the positioning. One of the things that I loved at my last company, Spiro, it was an AI driven CRM. And so we were trying to really reframe the conversation around how salespeople should manage their contacts. And we actually came up with calling ourselves the anti-CRM CRM, because first, for all practical matters, we were a CRM. We were in that space. It's what people knew. They needed the context. They had the budget for it. But we told everybody that we were the anti-CRM because we wanted to solve things differently than the way Salesforce did. And so then we could sort of start that conversation where we could say, here's why we think the old way wasn't working. Here's how the new way works. But also rest assured, we absolutely are that CRM that you want. We're just not the way that these old companies are doing it. And so you can be very tongue-in-cheek with something like that, long live this technology while you're also killing this technology. But I think you can also go the complete opposite way of basically saying, look, you're trying to solve this problem this way, but if you think about a completely different answer and sort of, take a step back and really approach it from a different viewpoint, you can rethink everything. And that can be very challenging for customers. It's very abstract. Just even as I'm talking to you, you can sort of see like that one is very abstract versus saying, hey, we know you need a CRM. We're a CRM, but we're a very different CRM. Think about it. I hate to use this example right now, but Tesla, they are a car, but they're a very different car. And when they first came out, talking about, this autonomous driving car, they tried to be a data, they had all of these things, but really they were a car, but you didn't have to drive the car. And so, it sort of makes you rethink what you're looking for. And it lets you sort of look for different pieces, where if you're looking for an automobile, there's certain things that you want. If you're looking for an automobile that will drive for you, suddenly some of the things you were looking for might not be as important. And this is where, in the technology space, when you're going against these big companies, there are some things that they've just taught you. You really want this feature. You really want this feature. And if you can reframe what you're looking for, how you're solving the problem, you can also reframe, look, I know you're looking for that one feature, but there's a reason we aren't doing it. And there's a reason that we took our software in a different place, because that's not important. And that's where you can start sort of, instead of saying you have this deficit, you can actually say, instead of doing that, we focused on what really is your pain point and we're solving it this way. And that's a non-issue.
It's kind of the Avis framing of we're number two, but we're better framing, where you're admitting that, hey, we don't have this feature, but you're also saying this is why we don't have this feature. And you just say, this is why we're better, because we don't have this feature. So you admit it up front. So at least when people are looking for it, you can say, this is the reason why, addressing those flaws.
Yeah, it's exactly why there's a lot of benefit to, really taking a step back and reframing the category, because you can actually say, that company that's been doing that feature for 20 years, yeah, that feature is great, but this is the problem that you're solving, and, we can solve it without doing that. And there's, benefits to doing that. And it lets you take what would historically have been your biggest weakness, and it makes it your strength of, look, we're not focusing and we're not losing product development on that one feature because we're going this way and we're moving faster. And here's the 3 things that we can do that they haven't even thought about.
You talked about, this is one way, and it also can coincide with talking about using the Gartner, the industry analyst side of things for enterprise. So what does that route even look like, so people can get a grip of how to even start engaging that conversation with outside parties or third-party analysts?
Yeah, so if you're going that path, there's a lot of conversations. There's a lot of partnering with the analysts. There's a lot of benefit to the analysts, and this is certainly not meant to be an analyst commercial. But if you're selling into that enterprise, talking to the analysts on a regular basis, not just briefing them about your product, but sort of explaining to them, this is why we think that there's this new category creation, and here's what we're seeing happening, and feeding them proof points along the way. This is what customers are asking for. Here's what customers are not asking for. Here's why we're winning. Pointing them, this is where, other smaller competitors joining in helps you, because the more that you can point the analysts to everything showing the market is moving, the more that they'll start paying attention to it. And when they really dig in, if you can back it up with customers who are doing it, prospects who are looking for it, other companies who are looking at it, then they'll start paying more attention too. And they can also give you feedback of, oh yeah, the big guys, they talk about this, but this is why they say it's not necessary. And you can start countering that almost behind the scenes and help them influence it. It takes a long time. It is a multi-year strategy. They don't move on a dime. Their research agenda is usually scheduled a year out. And so you have to be really comfortable investing. This is where investing time and energy and really focusing. And this is where, just when you think, okay, we've talked about this a lot. It was really exciting at the beginning. We were getting all this pickup. People were paying attention to us. It's kind of gone dull. That's where you have to really stick to it, because, 6 months, 9 months in, when it feels very repetitive to you, it's just starting to resonate. And you probably have another year and a half of telling the same story before it really takes off. And so from an enterprise perspective, it takes a lot longer. But also, if you think about if you're selling into that space, a lot of the times the selling cycle is probably 12 to 24 months. So, just put that in perspective of, this should move a lot faster. Look at the SaaS world. Things come and go so much faster. But when you're selling, a $500,000 product to a Fortune 50 company, you're talking to them for 2 years. And so obviously the analysts are probably on the same time frame as well.
That makes total sense. I mean, enterprise is always long sales cycles, they're long contracts with other vendors, and carving out a new category, like you said at the beginning, gets you another line on their budget where they're not paying for account-based marketing, for example. It's not another account-based marketing tool. It's this tool that does this, that helps with this form of marketing, that does. I'm just talking from a marketing perspective, but it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and the nice thing about on the enterprise side, it does take longer, but you can be more visionary. So you can actually talk about, look, this is where we're going. Imagine where we're going to be in 5 years. And, I think this is a topic from a thought leadership perspective that CTOs usually really like, where they can talk 5 to 10 years out because they don't have to be right. Because in 3 years, the world will change and they can keep moving their predictions. But because you have so much time where, these companies aren't moving so fast, you can sort of talk about, like, this is over the next couple of years what you need to solve, but think about it in 5 years or 10 years. This is where the world is going. If you think about, like, smart manufacturing is a great example, selling to those big companies, telling the future, you can get really visionary and you don't have to be accurate, and it doesn't have to be, exactly tied to your product roadmap because you have such a long runway. In my experience, that's where, the CTOs really get excited about being able to predict so far down the path. Sometimes they're right, but like I said, 3 years in, they can change their prediction, evolve their prediction. And so over time, they've always been right.
That actually brings me to, how do you get internal alignment for this? What is the strategy as a marketer to go and make sure everybody's rowing in the same direction? They understand where we're going. They understand what we're talking about, because as important as making your own category, you got to get that internal buy-in that everybody is talking the talk and walking the walk as well.
Yeah, it's not necessarily easy, but it's also not necessarily challenging in my experience. It's very much a positioning exercise. You really have to do the research, agree, get the buy-in from the executive team, from the right stakeholders. If you've done the research right, you've already been talking to the product team, you've been talking to the engineering team about where they're going, you've been talking to the sales team. And so when you can sort of build the roadmap of, okay, from a global story, and let's be clear, this is very much a storytelling versus, the product positioning. From a global story, this is where we're going with our market. It's what we're currently targeting. It also gives us room, whether we're going to acquire, whether we're going to grow, what that looks like. And here's how we back it up. And here's when we get to, and here's the company story, and here's the product story. And if you can really succinctly map that out, everyone is typically on the same page. And then it's really about training them from the ground up of, okay, you have to understand the product positioning, and then you have to understand the company positioning, and then you have to understand the market positioning. And sometimes you start with the market and work your way back, but it's really those 3 pillars that everybody needs to understand. And you need to give them examples every time. When you win a new customer, this is a validation for this market, and here's why. When you lose a deal, this is sort of a challenge. This is what they were looking for. We didn't quite have it, but the product is coming, but it's still a validation for the market where we're heading. When you hear competitor news, you can put it in perspective of, here's how we're going to respond to it, but they also see what we're seeing. They're hearing what we're seeing. And this is how, this is proving the direction that we're going, but this is how we're going to win and own that category. And so everything that you send to them has to put back into the context. I think the more context you can give everybody along the way, the more that they will embrace that story. And then as you're training them and telling them over and over again, in my experience, usually they'll come and they'll actually ask, well, how can I position this correctly? Or how do you think this ties into where we're going, versus them fighting? They all want to be rowing in the right direction. They just need the help.
We're in a very interesting time where the trust of institutions are a little bit lower than they used to be. When it comes to 10 years ago, a company can set a narrative and people maybe trust it more, but now people are trusting people more and over institutions. So how do you get, for the thought leadership side of it, that buy-in that there is a thought leader that's in the company, making sure that whether it's either the founder of the company or the CEO or the CMO that is out there talking about this, on stages or in webinars? What does that process look like?
When I think about thought leaders, it's always a person, typically an executive, because a director below, they could come and go at the company. Even better if it's a founder. To me, the company story obviously needs to tie to this, but people don't really pay attention to that. So, even right now, if you were to look at Robin's corporate LinkedIn, we obviously are doing marketing, but the bulk of the visionary stories are coming from actual people, because people trust people. They always have. I don't think that has changed. I think in today's world, the easiest place to find that person is if you have a founder who is the CTO or the CEO explaining, I started this company because I saw this problem, and tying it to that story. It makes it personal, but it also, they're putting their money where their mouth is, frankly, because they're saying, I saw this product that wasn't working. I thought of this new way of doing it, and I'm building this company to do it. And here's everything we're doing. If it's not the founder, you can find somebody who can build their credibility. And it always comes to the credibility side, where if it's a product person pointing to the customers, if it's a CEO pointing to the customers and the partners, and, here's how we're growing, and, giving some stats and sort of proving the story along the way, I think is really important. But I think absolutely has to come from a person or people, if you will. But it's, the story is truly personalized from their perspective, whether it's engineering, product, even marketing. We can all tell that same story, but we bring our own experience. And along the way, you have to prove, give examples, validate, give people a reason to trust you. And I think that's one of the challenges, especially in today's world. People don't trust. I think this is where AI generated content, you can spam everybody and you're going to lose trust, because AI generated content is not you. This is where I think you have to actually put in the work of having your own opinion, having your own voice, actually having something unique to say, and really putting that story out there and not relying on somebody else to do it for you.
Yeah, I always say content for content's sake. There's something called negative signal out there. There's positive signals and negative signals in marketing. And people always think of positive things, that if I put out more pieces of content, if I do more in social, if I do more here, it's a positive signal. But if you're putting out things that are below average or average and don't really have opinions, or it can also have a negative effect on your brand, and negative signal, and draw people away from your brand. So I totally agree with that, especially with the age of AI. Also, I don't know how much you could talk about it, but you're in an interesting place with Robin, because there was the whole shift to remote work, and now there's the shift to return to office, remote work, or hybrid. And so have you been dealing with, because the market with Robin is changing a lot too, because it was fully remote for 2 years, and then now it's like some people are pro return to office, some people aren't. So there's this eternal struggle as well.
Yeah. So I think Robin is a great example where when you have this story in the market, things can change, but they sort of validate the approach. And, with Robin, we're a workplace operations platform. At one point early on, it was really focused on managing desks. People coming back from COVID, they needed to be 6 feet away from each other. They weren't all coming to the office. Could you, hot desk, things like that. But as we get farther into the place where everybody is back, in some form or fashion. Maybe it's once a quarter, maybe it's a couple times a week, but people are going into the office. And so you have to make that work. And I think for Robin, the world has changed, but our view around people want to come together to celebrate, to collaborate, and to really sort of embrace that culture. And so, really sticking to some of those fundamentals, even as what that looks like has changed over time, has really made it easy for us from a storytelling perspective. Because yes, the product has absolutely changed. The market has absolutely changed. But at the end of the day, even when we were remote during the pandemic, everybody still needed to connect. And it's all about those connections and the celebrations and the collaborations. It's just the how has changed over time, which is great. This is where you can talk. I think, in 5 years, the office is going to look very different than it did today. And I also think, today it looks very different than it did 5 years ago. But that's the fun part of telling a market story, right? Is the market is always changing. And if you rethink it versus, there are some companies in our space where they think of the office as there is somebody at the front desk. You go in, you check in, you go to your office or you go to your cube. That's where you are. There's probably a mailroom, but no office exists like that anymore. It's not what people are looking for.
One other question I have is, okay, you've started creating a category, it's named, people starting to know it. How do you keep that momentum going and not, because now there's going to be new, once you've created the new market, there's obviously going to be new competitors coming into that market trying to steal market share, steal market cap. So how do you keep that momentum going and not lose track of that? You just because you're number one now, you can always lose that spot.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is once you created the market, or even as you're creating the market, you also have to focus on owning the market. And so you always have to be, if you're creating something new, by definition, you are an innovator, right? And so you always have to be innovating. And what we're offering today is very innovative, but we also have to be thinking about, well, 12 months down the road, what's that going to look like? And what's our innovation coming? And you have to keep telling that story. Going back to the CTO, always talking 5 years down the road, what is the innovations that are coming? What are the improvements that are coming? What does 2 years, 5 years, 7 years look like? And how are you staying ahead so that you've created this category, people understand it, you've been the innovator to begin with, but then you're driving innovation. I think this is where Apple, in most of their products, they do it really well. They can come out with the iPhone, they can talk about the iPhone, but they keep doing something different. Drives some people crazy, but there's always something that they're trying to push the innovation, whether it's a form or a function, but they're focused on innovating. And they keep telling that story about where they see that world evolving. They started getting into other media things because it fed into the device. And so, their story changed, but they were always trying to be an innovator. And of course, they also have billions of dollars, so it's easy to innovate. When you're a startup, sometimes it's really picking that one or two things that you're looking for. And it might be, as we said, this problem is changing. For us with Robin, the office is changing. We're solving today's problems, but we're also thinking about, what does it look like in 12 months? What's that problem? And when we get to there, we'll be waiting for you with the solution. So, it's really, really focused on thinking, what are the customers going to be looking for? What are they going to need? And making sure that you have the product when they're ready.
That's a great way to put it. And I also want to go into some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
One word that describes the category you created.
Unique.
Most underrated tool for shaping a marketed narrative.
Blogs.
Thought leader or book that shaped your thinking about this topic.
I don't have a specific one, but the ones that really shaped, there's like a handful, were ones sort of the insider guides to presidential campaigns. Because I think in a completely different world, and not recently, but going back 25 years when I started my career, the Peggy Noonans of the world, hearing how she would shape the world's opinion based on sound bites and thoughts, really made me think hard going into it about how, your tagline or, this is the one word synopsis of what we're doing, how it really has to have longevity.
Yeah, I think putting politics aside, if you just study politics, it's really good marketing, whatever they're doing. Not saying it's good or bad, like they're doing it for a positive, negative way, but going back in history of politics, it's so interesting to see how people shape that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so Peggy Noonan, she was the speechwriter for George Bush Sr. She also worked, many presidents before him. But, hearing her talk about things like going way back in history with the Berlin Wall and coming up with one single phrase that she knew was going to be the soundbite on the news, and it had to be a rallying cry, and just sort of hearing the science in her mind of coming up with Gorbachev tear down that wall, which, I think is probably a history lesson for a lot of your listeners. But in politics, you hear like, what's that one rallying cry that gets the world going? And in technology, it's sort of the same concept of, what's that one phrase that everyone can just sort of get behind? Again, going back to HubSpot, it was inbound. Like, it was just a word. They didn't invent the word inbound marketing. They didn't invent the concept, but they invented the excitement behind it, that they even had events and marketers were excited to go to it. And all they could talk about was inbound, inbound, inbound.
Yeah. And they shaped it as a strategy too, to how to go to market. So it was like people were doing it, but they doubled down on how to do it.
Exactly.
Biggest misconception people have about category creation?
That you can do it in just a few months and be done.
What's the hardest part of getting a category to stick?
Staying focused internally.
What's one thing you wish you knew before starting a new category journey?
I mean, the one thing I'd always want to know is what are the competitors trying to do, frankly, because if you know where they're going, it's easier to map out that category.
Lastly, I ask every marketer this on my podcast, but what's a marketing hill you would die on?
A marketing hill that I would die on is that every marketer, it doesn't matter what your role is, should understand both how a business works and how to write really, really well.
I love that. That is, I want to quote that one. That one, coming from marketing ops, that is something I learned well. Is you have to, me learning the whole business helped me become a way better marketer.
Yes, I will tell everybody on my team, you should know how to read a financial statement. You should know things like, what does LTV mean? What does CAC mean? What's the rule of 40? You should know how the product works. And you should absolutely, again, I don't care what role you're in, you should be a really, really good writer, because everything in marketing is about communication.
And lastly, where can people find you, what you're doing, and everything else?
The easiest place is on LinkedIn. I'm Kari with a K, Hanson. I would say I'm on there all the time. Feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I learned a lot today, and I know everybody will learn a lot from this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. Like I said when we started, I love talking about this topic. I'm pretty passionate about it. I think it can get really interesting, and I'm appreciative that I was able to geek out with you.
Thanks so much for listening. Keep tuning in to hear more great insights from the coolest marketers from around the world. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow the Marketing Millennials podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, I would greatly appreciate you giving us a 5-star rating. It helps bring more marketers into our community.